Blog Talk Radio.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Yaron Brook show on this, what day is it today? I don't even know what day it is today. I think it's Monday, yes, Monday. That's right, market went down 500 points and it went up 600 points or something like that. Crazy, crazy day in the stock market today, so it's definitely a Monday. Welcome, and stuff we're going to be covering today quickly. I mean, today's going to be very much a follow-up on the show I did yesterday about the riots in Paris. I want to follow up with regard to Macron's speech today to the French people and the proposal he made in order to rectify the situation and to prevent further riots, I think, in the future. I want to talk about Brexit, new development on the Brexit front. Also today, and maybe connect that to some of what we discussed yesterday in terms of France. I think there's a strong relationship between the two. And then I want to talk about stock markets, the recent declines in the stock market, the volatility in the stock markets, and what I think that suggests for the future, what the stock market is trying to tell us. But why is all this happening? Why is it all happening now? What is going on? And if we have time, we can talk about the potential government shutdown over the amount of money that Congress is willing to allocate for a wall. You all know how passionate I am about the wall. So those are going to be topics. We might end with some good news on free speech. It's always good, once in a while at least, to end on some good news, on something positive. All right, so if you remember yesterday, we discussed the riots in France, and I mentioned my observation that what's really happening throughout, I think, the Western world is at a political level, economic level, at an emotional level, a frustration with the centrists, with the middle-of-the-roaders, with the people who say, we don't believe in capitalism. Capitalism is bad. Capitalism is evil. Capitalism is selfish. Capitalism is no good. But you got to have some of it, because what can you do? You know, the rich are the ones who create the jobs, and we need the bankers to be happy, and we need to cut taxes because that, kind of creates jobs. But we don't like capitalists, and we don't like capitalism. But we got to use capitalism in order to sustain economic growth. And this is the conservatives in England and the conservatives in America and the left of center, old Labour Party in England, the Tony Blair Party. We'll talk about Tony Blair later, and the Bill Clintons of the world, and kind of the George Bushes of the world, the regular left and right who gravitate to the center, center-pulled left significantly, and with the basic idea that we need some capitalism, but we also need to redistribute wealth, and we also need to, because what really matters, what's really important, is taking care of the poor. What's really important is that we stop those evil businessmen from doing those horrible things, so we have to regulate them to death. And yes, there were way too many excesses of capitalism in 2008, and that's why we had the financial crisis. And you just have to trust us central planners. We will find the right balance. And this has been going on for, since World War II, since the end of World War II. And for a while, there were no problems because everything seemed to be improving because of the devastation of the war was so dramatic, was so bad that anything was an improvement over the quality of life during a war. And, of course, in many countries, in Europe, in Asia, in the United States, they unleashed enough of the capitalist spirits, if you will, to sustain economic growth and to improve the standard of living and improve the quality of life. And everybody seemed happy until around the 1970s when, the U.S. and Europe were hit by inflation. And since then, really, there's been this struggle. There was a short period of time where there was a bit of a movement towards freer markets. Reagan, Thatcher, the freeing up of Asia. But it wasn't done It wasn't justified. It wasn't sustained on a moral basis. It wasn't done on principle. I mean, Thatcher was the closest, and she wouldn't defend it on principle. It was still true that capitalism works, and we got to have it, and socialism just redistributes other people's wealth, and it doesn't work. In the end of the day, you can only have so much of it. We don't want to do away with it completely. We still have to have the National Health Service. We still have to have socialized medicine. But, you know, we can't go all out on socialism. That proved to be bad. We can't go all out on capitalism because that's immoral, and that has always been bad. So we've got to tilt towards capitalism during certain periods of time, like Thatcher Reagan, and then tilt away from it when it doesn't work so much anymore, like under Bush and like under most regimes since then. France has gone through the same thing. Those of you might remember during the 1980s, just as England, as the UK was moving towards Thatcher, France elected a socialist president. It elected François Mitterrand. And Mitterrand basically nationalized the banks and went full throttle towards socialism. And it was a major bust. And he completely reformed himself and landed up selling the banks and engaging in Thatcherite and even, you know, pro-free market policies to move towards this sacred center, towards, you know, we're not going to be radical or anything. And you know, and that's not bad, given the alternative. Given the alternative is uniformly, almost always, socialism. So many of us have been pretty happy with centrists like Tony Blair, like, you know, maybe like Bill Clinton for a while with the Republican Congress, who basically did nothing and who liberalized a little bit and kept things going because it was better than alternative, which is a rush to the left, a rush towards socialism. Because certainly there was not going to be a rush towards capitalism because we hadn't laid the moral foundations for a rush towards capitalism. We hadn't laid the ideological foundation for a rush towards capitalism, and the world didn't want that. The culture didn't want that. And what we're seeing today is the bankruptcy of that center, the bankruptcy of the neither here nor there, the bankruptcy of let's tinker and let's centrally plan, and the frustration of the people who were promised that everything was going to be good for them, the middle class, the lower middle class, the working class. They were promised that they would be better as a consequence of this. And they're worse off. Or not worse off, but they feel worse off. They feel that relatively speaking, they're worse off. They feel like the economy's grown and technology's advanced, but they've kind of stood in place. And whether that's justified or not is questionable, but to a large extent, they're not seeing the opportunities that they were promised. They're not seeing the rises of standard of living that they anticipated. And you're seeing that in the US, in Britain, and in France. And you're seeing that frustration. And Macron was this last bastion of centrism. He has engaged in some very positive reforms in France, some labor reforms, some tax reforms. He did do away with this wealth tax. It was, Macron also has a whole agenda for next year where he's going to continue to reform labor markets and capital markets in France for the better. But all tepidly, all in the name of, we need a little bit of that evil capitalism because, hey, it's the only thing that produces economic growth, but we're not going to actually go all out and we're not going to defend it morally. We can't defend it morally and nobody defends it morally. And by the way, we need to continue to redistribute wealth on a massive scale. We need to continue to regulate it on a massive scale. And we need to make sure that the central planners tinker with it just enough to make you happy. So today, Macron came out and gave a speech to try to calm the French public down. And what did he offer them? Cake, as they say, you know, as Louis XIV or Louis XVII's wife, you know, give them cake, right? He gave them cake. What did he give them? An increase in the minimum wage. Minimum wage is going to go up, all right? Now, youth unemployment in France is already very high. Unemployment for unskilled labor is already very high. You're increasing the minimum wage, which will increase youth unemployment and raise the cost of living for most other Frenchmen. How is that going to help? He did say he would repeal some proposed increased taxes on pensioners. All right, I'm always for doing away with increasing taxes. But basically, he gave them nothing. And he offered nothing. And he offered no new vision, no new plan, no new goals. He basically said, we're staying the course. Right? Staying the course, which is nothing. And that's where we are, right? So I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen with the demonstrations. It's going to be interesting to see. My guess is they will continue because he gave them nothing. And he presented nothing, and he presented no vision of the future, no alternative path, no reason for people to think now their expectations, their opportunities have been broadened. You know. One of the things that I've been reading about is the real demographic shift that is happening in France, and you could say it's happened in the United States, where the cities, the urban centers have done very well, where the urban centers, the cities, at least in the centers of the cities, infrastructure is very good, trains run on time, everything. There's a good tax base, and the central planners has really devoted all the resources to building up the cities and the center cities and the tourist attractions. But even in non-touristy cities in France, generally people in the cities are living fairly well. Now, not in the suburbs, not in the periphery, but they are kept to the side. They are kept out. They are secluded. And in a sense, there are three societies in France today. There's the middle class in the cities that lives pretty well, rich and middle class in the cities. There are the suburbs, primarily immigrants, where it is very violent, it is very poor, and where unemployment is massive, particularly youth, among the youth. And then there is rural France, where unemployment is very high again, very high, where infrastructure is crumbling, where cities are falling apart, where the trains do not run on time, where the center cities are places people want to escape. Right? Annie reminds me that the wife of Louis XV was Marie Antoinette, who said, let them eat cake, or I think what she meant was, as Annie points out, brioche. Let them eat brioche, which is kind of bread. I don't know if it's cake, but anyway. Macron kind of said that, but of course, what else is he going to say? Here's the bread, take the bread, take, here's a 5-course meal. So you really get a bifurcation of French society, and I think you can identify that in American society as well, where rural America is living a very different lifestyle, living a very different life than some of the coastal cities, where life is pretty good. In spite of kind of the socialist policies of those coastal states, you know, life is pretty good if you're middle class or if you're wealthy. And there's a real bifurcation of values. There's a real rejection of the values of the city. The values of the city as represented by, I don't know, the obsession of the New York Times around, I don't know, transgender rights. The obsession of the Paris elites around global warming. And the people in the heartland are saying, well, wait a minute, you know, who cares about transgender? We're struggling here. We don't have jobs. You promised us, and we don't have it. Or in France, well, wait a minute, you know, you care about future generations and global warming and stuff. We don't care about global warming. We care about feeding our families tomorrow, of you know, just surviving economically. And you're ignoring that because the elites in the cities have a different agenda than we have here. And again, that is a global, that is a Western trend, if you will, of a real real battle of values, a real separation of values. Now, I think both are wrong. The values of both sides are wrong. In America, certainly, the values of the heartland are religion and often still associated with the welfare state, with protectionism, with Buy America. The values of the coast are values of the left, values of socialism for everybody else, of course. Both are wrong, and nobody today, as we've said, nobody stands for capitalism. In France, again, the values are values that are associated with the political right and the political left today, neither of which is associated with capitalism, neither of which are values of freedom, neither of which are values of individualism. All right, so that was Macron today. My expectation is riots will continue, but we will keep an eye on it and update you and see as things develop in France and in the rest of Europe. I think it's fascinating, and I think it suggests that what we might see in America one of these days. All right, we've got a bunch of super chat questions. I think they're related, so let me go over these. If Britain has liberalism, while Germany lagged behind with Prussian authoritarianism, why was Germany overtaking Britain in the early 20th century? I don't think Germany was overtaking. I don't know what you mean by early 20th century. I think that. So if you mean pre-World War I, Germany was starting to overtake Britain. I think a lot of it had to do with the abandonment of the British of many of its liberal principles in the early part of the 20th century. I also think that the British were hampered by a colonial system that was bleeding them, that they militarily they were occupied with uprising. I'm sorry, yes, it's Macron, not Macron. Sorry, Macron. Hopefully everybody knew what I was talking about. Thanks, Robert, for correcting me. I think what happened was that Germany had focused the last part of the 20th century with providing enough freedom to establish industrialization, create an industrial society, enough capitalism, and rejection of outright socialism to establish an industrial base in Germany and wealth and entrepreneurs, and think of the big industrial companies, big industrial firms in Germany, and was not being held back by a colonial system and a war effort and a military efforts that the British Empire had to deal with. So while the empire, I think, was was beneficial to the British up until a certain point in the 19th century, it became a real burden to the British in the 20th century. So I think that's explanation. Now, I don't know a lot about kind of German Prussian history of the early 20th century, the extent to which they actually did liberalize. And there were German liberals, by the way, throughout that period. There's no accident, I think, that the Austrian school came out of Austria. There was a line of thinkers in Austria and Germany who were pro-capitalist, liberal. And I think some of those policies were instituted in Germany, and some of those policies led to the success in Germany. Whereas in Britain, that liberalism was already fading in the beginning of the 19th century, in the beginning of the 20th century. And of course, by the middle of the 20th century, the socialists were well entrenched in Great Britain, much more than they were entrenched in Germany. If I did not answer your question, then follow up, because if I got the dates wrong or something, let me know. Okay, another question from the same asker. Could you please crush the myth of German? Now, I assume that word in German, which is very long and I'm not going to try to pronounce, represents kind of the German miracle of post-World War II. So there's this myth that the economic success post-World War II was a result of the German social welfare state. And no, it wasn't. It was the consequence of the liberalization of the German economy in the late 1940s by the then German finance minister, and then I think prime minister, but certainly finance minister, who did it in spite of the advice and the recommendations and the strong suggestions of his American occupiers, who wanted to establish a far more socialist Germany than the Germans actually wanted. So it was the Americans pushing for socialism. It was the Germans pushing away from socialism. There were actually some classical liberals who ran the German government in the early days, and they liberalized that economy and allowed it to really flourish by allowing for private enterprise and private markets. And yes, there was some regulation, particularly on the labor side. There was some labor protection. But it was minimal as compared to what the Americans wanted. And it was minimal as compared to other countries in Europe, certainly as compared to France. And one of the reasons that Germany has done so well is, since World War II, is because of its relative economic freedom post-World War II. And not because of its massive redistribution of wealth, because the redistribution of wealth has not been anywhere close to what it has been in France, and not even close to what it was during the more socialist periods in the Scandinavian countries past. So it really was a consequence of liberalizing and freeing up German business to do business. And of course, the economic activity resulting from money flowing in to actually create the building, and then great German engineering and German ingenuity, which resulted in great companies like BMW and Mercedes-Benz and Siemens and other great technology companies on the German side. One more question on Germany. In 2013, the General Federal Court decided that involuntary resettlements with compensation for gaining coal are justified. Involuntary dispositions with compensation for gaining coal. I don't understand the question. So in the comment section, maybe you can ask it again in a way that I could understand it. I don't understand what resettlements for gaining coal means. Maybe it's a typo. So ask it again. Let's see. Maybe that's you. All right. Let's see. One other question. One of the worst lines in Enlightenment now is when Pinker says that free market and regulation can coexist. Yes, Steven Pinker is a mixed economy guy. He believes, again, in capitalism is necessary, a little bit of it, to create the economic growth, to create the technological success, to create all that. He recognizes that all that is a product of capitalism. But you need to regulate it, you need to control it, you need to hold it back. You can't let it go free because you can't trust those businessmen, because you cannot trust self-interest. I go back to my talk on morality of capitalism. Capitalism is hated because self-interest is hated. The welfare state exists because of altruism. The regulatory state exists because of altruism. Capitalism is hated because of altruism and because of hatred of self-interest, of rational self-interest. It's all a moral issue. There's nothing here. There's nothing here that is, there's nothing about the economics of capitalism. There's nothing about the politics of capitalism. The fundamental objection to capitalism is moral, ethical. The hatred of self-interest and the veneration, which leads to hatred of self-interest, of altruism. We're still Christians when it comes to ethics. And as long as we're Christians when it comes to ethics, we will not have capitalism. Okay, the question about Germany was clarified. So the idea was to force people to move from their homes so companies could gain coal. Of course that is evil. Of course that is wrong. I mean, that's a violation of private property rights. And if the companies want to gain coal, then they should buy people's property. So the state has no business in confiscating anybody's land for any purpose. I'm against all Eminent domain, the only job of government is the protection of individual rights. The only job of government is the protection of individuals from fraud, from force, from violence against them. The government has no role in figuring out what the best economic use of any piece of land is. Eminent domain for so-called public purposes or private purposes or any purposes should be banned. One of the things I would change in the American Constitution is do away with eminent domain. Do away with the ability of government to take land for supposedly the public interest. I think that's a major flaw. All right, quickly, how influential is Marxism in today's culture? I mean, that's a tricky question, because I really don't believe that many real Marxists in today's culture. That people talk about cultural Marxism, but cultural Marxism often is just a rejection of Marx and rejection of what Marxism actually stood. I think cultural Marxism, what people describe as cultural Marxism, is far more nihilistic, is far more postmodern than anything Marx would have done. I think the main influence that Marxism has today is that it is ingrained in our thinking. It is kind of established truth that things like inequality is important. Things like capitalists and businessmen exploit labor. So certain concepts that Marx came up with, wrong, have been proved wrong over and over and over again. Because Marxist professors have been talking about them and talking about it and talking about them and writing about them and writing about them and writing about them, to a large extent unchallenged by mainstream intellectuals, those kind of concepts have become ingrained in our thinking. So that I go to campuses and people constantly talk about the exploitation of labor. Now it's about exploitation of labor in China. But the whole idea of labor as a trade, a value for value win-win relationship, Marx has destroyed, unfortunately. And people just think in Marxist terms when they think about labor. And I think so much of how we think about economics is basically Marx and Keynes. And even though they might not be influential as a theory advocated in and of itself anymore, because I don't think there are many people who actually advocate Marx as Marx, they have set the terms of debate in the culture, and in that sense, they're hugely influential. All right, here's a question I won't answer. Sorry, Michael, I know you put money on it, but I'm just not going to answer. The Objective Standard versus Ayn Rand Institute, was there some conflict, and what's the current status? You'll have to ask the current CEO of the Ayn Rand Institute. But I think the relationship right now is a good relationship, and that's all I'll say about it. If Americanism is the only legitimate form of patriotism, what should all the other countries do? Just celebrate little Americanism in their history? Well, what other countries should do is strive to adopt Americanism. That is, strive to adopt the principles that are America, because the principles that are America are universal. The principle of reason and individualism, the principle of individual rights and the government's job of protecting individual rights, those principles are universal principles. And therefore, every nation should strive to adopt them and then be patriotic. But I don't believe most people should be patriotic, because most countries are not good. And there's nothing in their history, nothing in their culture. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but most countries, most countries I'm not exaggerating. Wow, we're getting so many super chat. I'm going to have to go to Brexit in a minute, so we're going to have to put the super chat on hold for a little while. And then celebrate the good things in your history. So certainly somebody in the UK, there's a lot in the history, from John Locke to the Magna Carta to lots of events during British history that have reinforced the principles of individual liberty and individual sovereignty and individual rights. And I'm sure that every country has moments like that, and you celebrate whatever it is about that. Now, a country like I don't know, a country like Germany can celebrate certain aspects of a culture and then ask the question, where did it come from? Whether it's to celebrate the great music of the 19th century, or in Russia, the music and the literature of the 19th century, France, the literature of the 19th century, the great painting, the great sculpture, and then ask the question, where does that come from? What is it about the culture that is France that generated so many great authors, so many great painters, so many great sculptors? And that's what needs to be celebrated, needs to be identified, and needs to be celebrated. And ultimately what that will be is some aspect of individualism, some aspect of real virtue. And every country should find that, the extent to which you have fought for individual liberty. All right, here's the last two questions on the Super Chat, at least for a while. There is research to show that CO2 emissions cause physical harm. Does this mean all factories with CO2 emitted things be shut down or regulated? That's bizarre. I mean, every time you breathe out, you're emitting CO2. Should we stop people from breathing because it might cause harm? Of course not. There's certain environments in which you don't want lots of CO2. I don't know, you don't want lots of CO2 in a closed home. You actually have regulators that regulate how much CO2 is in the air, and not regulate, but let you know, alarm when there's too much CO2, because too much CO2 can be really, really damaging. I don't know of any research other than the climate change stuff that says that CO2 emissions from automobiles or from factories or from out there cause human harm. Actually, they enhance plant species, they enhance other life forms. It's not clear to me that it enhance. But you couldn't stop it anyway, right? So CO2 emission is how we live. It's a requirement of human life today. Not only do we breathe it out, but the whole industrial civilization depends on CO2 emissions. You can't say, in order to save human beings, we're going to kill civilization. You can't say, in order to save human beings from a little bit of physical harm, we're going to stop all progress. That is bizarre. It is progress that sustains human life. Imagine if in the 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century in London, there was coal soot in the air. Literally soot. I mean, you would breathe in the black stuff from coal because they were burning so much coal. And it clearly was damaging to human lungs. And people were getting sick. My life expectancy during that period went from 39 to 60. But it was not healthy to breathe in this coal. Imagine if what they said was, we're regulating coal. We're stopping. No more coal. We're not producing coal. We're not burning coal. No more burning coal. Yeah, you would have been a little healthier and you would have died at 39. The Industrial Revolution would have ended, would have stopped right there. All progress, wealth creation, bam, nothing would have happened. And that is absurd. That is absolutely insane. To say that I'm going to make a small benefit to the physical health of people at the expense of civilization. So, no. You would not ban CO2, you would not ban coal, you would not ban something that is a requirement for civilizational advancement. Okay, this is the last question I'll take for Super Chat for a while. Why are comment sections filled with anti-Semites? Because I'm a Jew, ethnically, I guess. And YouTube is filled with alt-right people, and I think there are a lot of alt-right people who flirt with objectivism. There are a lot of collectivistic objectivists out there, and they come and they troll, and a lot of what they do, this is the age in which we live. We live in an age of tribalism and collectivism and fascism, and an appeal of fascism, an appeal of racism of all forms, and a dramatic increase of anti-Semitism. And this attack on a synagogue is no accident. It happened a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago. It's a direct consequence of the rise of anti-Semitism that we've seen over the last 3-4 years, directly from a group that's called the alt-right. And it's there. It's there. You know, and there's There's suddenly a growing violence on what's called the right, on what is identified as the right. There's growing violence from the anti-Semitic racist right. And part of their growth is manifest in them trolling people like me. All right. And hey, and because I'm ethnically unlikable, I guess, ideas don't matter. Reed asks quickly, there should be no animal cruelty laws, correct? Yes. No animal cruelty laws. Animal cruelty might be immoral, but it should not be illegal. The law only deals with individual rights. Therefore, it only deals with the rights of humans. Only humans have rights. So it certainly is immoral to treat animals cruelly, but it is not and should not be and cannot be illegal. All right. Let me just say something about Brexit. Wow, we're already 35 minutes in. Wow, you're not stopping today with the super chats. So Brexit was again the vote on Brexit. So it was supposed to be a vote on Parliament tomorrow in the British Parliament about Brexit. This Brexit deal that May has put together. It's a horrible deal. It's worse than staying in the European Union. It's the worst of all worlds. And it was going to fail. The Labour Party was going to vote against it. I think the Irish parties were going to vote against it. The Scottish parties were going to vote against it, and many Conservatives were going to vote against it, and it failed. And so it was going to fail. So May said there's not going to be a vote. She's going to go back to the European Union and try to negotiate. Very weak hand she has to negotiate, and she's going to bring it back to a vote probably in January. This is all suggesting a real disaster, or maybe the best outcome possible, which is that Britain, the United Kingdom, leaves Europe without a deal, which might be the best outcome possible. What I found interesting, other than the fact that this is, such a political disaster in the UK, is that Jeremy Corbyn, the left, is kind of pro-Brexit, but at least Jeremy Corbyn is. The Labour Party split. He opposes this deal because it's not good enough, but he supports Brexit, which is kind of interesting, left and right converging. I think Corbyn wants Brexit because he wants to be more socialist than the European Union might allow him. The European Union is too capitalist for his liking, and he wants to manifest himself as too socialist. And I was thinking, as I was reading about this and Corbyn's attitude, that what I said yesterday and what I said earlier today about France is so reflected in British politics. So think about what I think are the best years of British politics in the last 100 years, since World War II, certainly. And that is Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher was the best defender of capitalism among political leaders in power that I know of. She was good. She wasn't great, but she was good. And she did amazing things. And she changed Britain, and she changed Great Britain forever, for a long, long time, not forever. And she turned it away from socialism in a deep, fundamental sense, and she actually made capitalism appealing to some extent. To some extent. Didn't provide them all defense, but still made it appealing to some extent. And it became so appealing, and socialism was so discredited, that what you had was the Tony Blair years. You got a Labour Party prime minister who was the least socialist, maybe, of any Labour Party leader in Labour Party history. He actually took out of the Labour Party Constitution manifesto the provision that says something about, socialism and the idea of nationalization, right? He really brought the Labour Party to this place in the center. We need capitalism. We don't believe in capitalism, but we need capitalism a little bit. A little bit. Because that's what leads to economic growth. I've said this over and over again, right? And he purged the labor movement from the real socialists. And for a long time, that was pretty successful because the UK economy did well and everything was great until the financial crisis. And then this middle-of-the-road nothingness from the left was blamed for the financial crisis, and the country went to the right, but it went to the right in the form of a conservative party, which was in the center, not pro-capitalist, nowhere near Margaret Thatcher, was boring center. So you get, again, a center that doesn't stand for anything, this time from the right. But what happened was that the left, the Labour Party, shifted dramatically. What the Labour Party did was it basically returned to its more socialist roots by appointing Jeremy Corbyn, who says, I'm going to nationalize stuff. I'm going to make tuition free. Jeremy Corbyn has basically taken the Labour Party to what it always was, to real socialism. And that's his appeal. Now, I still don't think he can win, because I still think that socialism is so discredited that it still cannot win, but it might. We'll see if an election is held. The conservatives and the so-called center has so discredited itself. And this is the point I keep making. The political spectrum, left, right, center, is meaningless. It's meaningless. It's all gradations of statism. And statism manifests in different ways. But it's all statism. And the center is just statism, you know, with a little bit of the statism of the right and a little bit of the statism of the left, and the real political spectrum. And I've abandoned left and right because I think those are being captured by the existing left and right. So I think it's useless to fight over left and right. They're not exactly fundamental terms in political philosophy. And the real spectrum is individualism versus collectivism, freedom versus slavery, capitalism versus statism. And the entire political spectrum of today is on the statist side. There's no individualists. I mean, there might be an individual here, an individual there, who are individualists in the political world. But there's no political party that represents individualism, neither in America, nor in the U.S. Neither in the U.S. nor in Europe. So what you have today is a center, which is a little bit of the left and a little bit of the right, and a right that's a little bit of the left and a lot of the right, and a left that's a lot of the left and a little bit of the right. But they're all just different forms of statism that emphasize different aspects of their altruism, of their central planning, of their collectivism, of the manifestation of statism. And people seem to be fed up with a mealy-mouthed center that can't make up its mind, that doesn't stand for anything. And it's not that in giving up on the center they are rallying towards the cause of freedom, individual rights, and capitalism. No. They are rallying, in Great Britain, they are rallying to the cause of socialism, a la Jeremy Corbyn. In France, they're rallying to the cause of a former communist, I forget his name, who ran for president, who was becoming very popular when the election was coming, and Marie Le Pen on the statist, you know, semi-fascist right. In America, we're seeing the Democratic Party move way out to the left, towards Bernie Sanders. You know, soft socialism, not quite Jeremy Corbyn socialism, but soft socialism. Socialism is no longer a dirty word in American politics for the first time maybe in history. And the Republican Party has no clue where it is, but it is heading towards a populist right of Donald Trump. Anti-capitalist, anti-individualism, anti-individual rights across the entire political spectrum. And you're seeing the middle empty out, the middle be uninteresting. And that's what you're seeing all over the place. And the Jeremy Corbyns of the world are on the rise, and the Tony Blairs of the world are on the decline. And I think ultimately, you know, the Clintons of the world, at least the Bill Clinton, the kind of the pragmatic center, neither here nor there, That's what's disappearing. And you'll see that in Germany, and you'll see that in Sweden, you'll see that across Europe in election after election, even in Italy, right? I think the coalition now is of a populist left party and a populist right party. And they together are running the country because the middle, there's nothing there. There's no... Right. That's scary. Very, very, very scary. All right. A few other super chat questions before we go on to the stock market. Talk about scary. Oh my God. Can you please comment on Peter Schiff's insistence of imminent doom, given that it seems like it might actually be starting now? I think Peter's wrong. Peter's been insisting on imminent doom for a long time, pre-2008 crisis, well before the 2008 crisis. It's why he became so prominent, because he actually predicted the 2008 crisis. But then he went on to say it's going to get worse, it's going to get worse, we're going to get hyperinflation, and then we're going to get this, and we're going to get that, and nothing's happened. I don't think we're in imminent doom a la Peter Schiff. I think we're in big trouble. I'll get to that in a minute. But I don't think it's the dollar's finished, and, you know, if anything, look at the pound. Look at the pound sterling. Look at what's going on in China. Look at the slowing growth in China, which is much more substantial than the slowing growth of in the United States. So I don't see what Peter Schiff is suggesting happening, but I will comment more on that in a few minutes when I talk about the stock market. Is Bibi Netanyahu the Thatcher of Israel? Oh my God, no. Bibi Netanyahu is a spineless political weasel. Wow, I'm pretty harsh today. Spineless political weasel. Yeah, I've never liked Netanyahu. He, for a little while, was good when he was finance minister and did some deregulation. As prime minister, he is a statist, middle of the road, nothing. Foreign policy is awful. His defense policy is awful, and his economic policy is a disaster. So, no, I'm not a fan of Bibi Netanyahu's at all. Thatcher was much better than him, much better. What is your opinion of Bjorn Lomborg and the Copenhagen Consensus Center? How did this body's goals and methodology map into objectivist philosophy? I don't know that much about it. This is a guy who says, look, global warming's happening. It's just not catastrophic. And hey, there are much bigger problems like work poverty that we should be focused on. There's nothing really that maps onto the objectivist philosophy as far as I can tell. I mean, he's rational. He's more rational than most people about climate change, and I give him credit for that. And he's published some good books about climate change. I think this is the right person we're talking about. And you know, they've published a lot of good work about climate change and about economic growth and about the costs of the proposals to deal with climate change. But it's not a philosophy. There's no philosophy there. There's nothing to map onto objectivism. There's some good stuff there that we can use and we can adapt. It's also true that I never think of it in terms of climate change versus helping the poor. I mean, that's such a collectivistic, such an altruistic way of thinking about the world, right? The question ultimately always in politics has to be, what is the position that is pro-individual liberty? What is the position that is pro-individual rights? Nothing else matters. It's not about poverty. It's not about climate change. It's not about pollution. It's not about industry. It's not about taxes. It's not about any eminent domain. It's not about any particular issue. All of these issues can be answered by asking the question, what is the individual rights perspective? What increases individual freedom? What increases the individual's ability to live a rational life based on his own reason in pursuit of his own values? That's it. Everything else is subservient to that. Liberal Deutsch asks, you say that something has to be done to a land for you to own it. How much? What about the cultural landscape? Can you really own and maintain it? I don't know what cultural landscape means. No, you can't own and maintain a cultural landscape. Cultural landscape is about achievements. It's about ideas. It's about creations. The creator owns those. You don't own it because you're German, you don't own Beethoven. So I don't know what owning a cultural landscape means. It cannot exist. Something has to be done to land for you to own it. Yeah, I mean, that was the old Homesteading Act and homesteading ideas. And in the law, even today, if you have land that's completely abandoned and you do nothing with it, then I think after a certain amount of time, that land, that land could become somebody else's property, right? But how much, I don't know. I mean, that is for the philosophy of law to figure out. It's very, very complicated. It's a complicated issue that I think the law has already solved. There's nothing new that I think I can add to that question. I would look at the laws in the United States with regard to abandoned properties. I would look to the old laws about homesteading acts, about what they had to do, like fence the land in, cultivate it a little bit to own land. But again, the main point about cultural landscape, I don't think there is such a thing. I don't think, I guess you mean national parks and stuff like that. I don't think there should be national parks and things like that. So national parks should be privatized, cultural landmarks should be privatized, all of that should be privatized. Somebody says, I love Netanyahu. Yeah, all right. That tells me a lot about you, right? Netanyahu is the guy who in 1997 shook Yasser Arafat's hand and cut a deal with him. He's the guy who just refused to go crush the Hamas in Gaza and has lost 2 wars in Lebanon, has lost 2 wars in Gaza Strip, and is a complete and utter disaster when it comes to dealing with Hezbollah and Hamas. He is also the guy who is overseeing massive regulations of the Israeli economy, has not seen a real deregulation and a move towards more freedom and more capitalism in the Israeli economy. He was a good, as I said, he was a good finance minister, awful prime minister. And those of you who love him, you love a statist. And by the way, Bibi Netanyahu, I once sent Bibi Netanyahu the paper I did on the moral defense of Israel, on the moral case for Israel, and he sent me back a note. So I have a note from him saying, I enjoyed the book, I enjoyed your article, but you're wrong, Yaron. The moral case for the state of Israel is the presence of the Jews from biblical times in the state of Israel all the way today. A more collectivistic justification of the morality of the state of Israel you cannot come up with. So I have very little respect for Bibi Netanyahu. Annie says that Bjorn Lomborg is also a big proponent of capitalism as a solution to solving the world's problems. I don't think, Bjorn Lomborg, with all due respect, I don't think he knows what capitalism is, not real capitalism. He's a proponent of using markets, just like many centrists, to solve third world problems, and good for him for promoting GMOs. He's a rational guy, but I don't think, again, it doesn't map onto objectivism. It's just that he's a rational guy. And not only is Bibi Netanyahu not an objectivist, he is a statist and a mixed economy guy and a loser when it comes to wars and when it comes to foreign policy, and has been really bad for Israel. And there are better people in Israel who could run the Israeli government and have been for a long, long time. And this is not new. I've been saying this since the 1990s about Netanyahu. He had real opportunities to completely reframe the discussion in the Middle East, and he has failed across the board. All right, what else? Will the state of California turn into Detroit? Maybe one day, but I think it's going to take a long time, just like it took Detroit a long time. But primarily because there's just too much wealth and there are too many productive people in California. So what keeps California rolling is the productivity of Silicon Valley, the productivity of Hollywood, the productivity of people in Orange County and San Diego. It's an incredibly productive state. It's got great universities, it's got great science, and it's got great technology. And as long as people are using their minds and developing and building and creating and making stuff, then they can subsidize the socialist policies of the state government quite a lot. And so far, we have not seen the massive exodus that conservatives have always predicted for California. The exodus has not been anywhere near as dramatic as one would have expected. And as a consequence, the Dagneys and the Reardons keep subsidizing the California state and California state policies. And as long as Dagny keeps working, the statists can keep going. I mean, this is why Galt insists that she, I'm not going to say because I don't want to give the plot away, but as long as Dagny and Reardon keep working, as long as the great minds and the great industrialists and the great businessmen keep working, you can get a lot of statism. You can suffer under a lot of statism. So, yeah, I think ultimately, if nothing changes, yes. But a lot of business will have to leave. The United States' dominance in technology would have to dissipate or at least leave California. Just like the auto industry crumbled starting in the late 1970s and never really recovered. And as a consequence, Detroit stopped having, a cash cow from which to milk through taxes to fund all its social programs. California still has that milk cow, cash flow milk cow. All right, I want to comment quickly on the stock market, and then we will go from there. I mean, the stock market is taking a massive beating since certainly in October, November, and now in December. Volatility is way up. Now, it's interesting. Volatility is way up, but volatility is basically returning to normal. We had a decade of way below normal volatility in the stock market, primarily as a result of the central bank's manipulation of interest rates and the money supply and keeping interest rates so low. And so there's been massive distortions in the markets, and those massive distortions have manifested themselves, among other things, in lower than normal volatility in primarily in the equity markets, in the stock markets. And what you're seeing is the last 3 months that evaporating. What you're also seeing the last 3 months is that the markets have come to certain realizations about the Trump administration. They've come to the realization that all the good news is in the past. That is, corporate tax cuts done, and of course, corporate tax cuts only have benefits in the short run, not in the long run, because those corporate tax to equities, because the corporate taxes ultimately the benefit goes to employees and to others within the corporate environment. I've talked about this before. The stocks themselves don't get a massive benefits. Profits don't rise over the long run because of corporate tax breaks. The only thing that the company pays less to the government, but competition drives prices down, so prices go down. Profit margins don't go up. So the tax cuts is a one-time thing. Deregulation was going on in the first and second year of Trump administration, but it's clearly slowed, and it's not as dramatic as people expected, not as dramatic as people wanted, certainly not in the financial industry. In the financial industry, there's been very little deregulation. And then finally, the markets are realizing that Trump is serious about his nutty, crazy, insane position about trade, and that he is not kidding when he says that trade wars are great and we're going to win and tariffs are good. And what did he call himself 2-3 days ago? Tariff man, and priding himself on tariffs. I think the markets have realized that that he's serious about this stuff, and that this is not 3D chess, and that he doesn't have a grand plan to change the world. So so they've realized that there's a lot of risk in this Trump administration. On top of that, They realized that the Democrats were going to take the House. The Democrats did take the House. And once the Democrats take the House, any bipartisan deals are probably going to move us more to the left, more spending, more government spending, which is bad for the economy, and more regulations, more controls. If their deals cut, they're going to be anti-markets. So the combination of the good news is in our past, the stuff Trump is doing unilaterally is bad on the trade, primarily on trade. There might be here a period of just political mayhem because of impeachment and the Russian stuff and all the nonsense that is going on in Washington, D.C. And the Democrats now control the House, which is going to limit whatever deregulation or whatever good stuff Trump might have wanted to do. I doubt it, but Republicans would have wanted to do. Could have been good, right? So it's done, right? So the market is pricing that. Now, in addition to that, as I've said, as I predicted for a long time now, we are probably heading into a recession. Probably heading into a recession sometime next year because Trump's economy is unsustainable because it's built on massive increases to government spending while cutting taxes, which is not sustainable. And the massive increases in government spending are draining economic growth. And trade barriers, tariffs, everything that Trump is doing and saying with regard to trade is hurting the U.S. economy. You're seeing that with Ford, you're seeing that with GM, but you're seeing that small businesses all across the United States. And this could very easily bring us towards a recession. I don't think it's a 2008 recession. I don't think it's an end of the world a la Peter Schiff recession, but I do think there's a recession coming. Trade tariffs, trade barriers are disastrous for economic growth, are disastrous for economic success. And to the extent that Trump is serious about all this, it's really bad for the economy. Again, not end of the world like bad, but bad. So you're going to see economic slowdown already in the first quarter next year. You're going to see potentially a recession late in 2019 or early 2020. Now, if there's a recession in 2020, that now makes it more likely that a Democrat wins the presidency. So everything's like there's huge amounts of uncertainty. Now, I, for one, have always thought there were huge amounts of uncertainty, and I didn't understand why the market was not pricing it. But the market has finally decided to price all the uncertainty related to the Trump administration, related to Democrats in Congress, related to trade wars, and all the and related to the fact that Trump has not done as many good things for the economy as people had expected. I find it interesting that in the first year of Trump administration, people said, wow, Trump is great for the economy. Look at the stock market. And this year, people are saying, oh, man, Trump is great for the U.S. economy. Don't look at the stock market. Please, just don't look. Don't look. Because if you take the last 2 years and you take the first 2 years of any president and you look at the stock market, Trump's first 2 years are not particularly great, and almost all of it is a consequence. All the good stuff, the fact that the market's still positive, is all the result of the first few months that he was in office. The last year has been awful. Trump did a few things that's good for the economy. As I said, he deregulated, he lowered corporate taxes. The deregulation is the primary thing. He got us out of the Paris Accord, which was bad long-term for the economy, and it's good that we're out, but nobody believes we'll stay out. As soon as the Democrats get back into the White House, we'll be back into the Paris Accords. He's deregulated energy, which is very good for the economy. So there's a lot of things that he's done that are good, but not that many. And it's ended. Now he has to deal with the House with Democrats, and the economy has to deal with his complete insanity with regard to trade. So, yeah, I recognize that there were things in the past that Trump has done that were good for the economy. That was all priced. And once that's priced, and there's no more good things that he can do, then you start pricing in the bad things that are happening and the bad things that he can do and the Democrats can do and the Republicans can do through legislation. And that's what's happening right now. Plus, economic slowdown. There's no question. Already fourth quarter will probably be slower than the third quarter. And the first quarter next year is going to be slower. So we're heading towards slower economic growth. The employment numbers last week were below expectations. And, it just is what it is, right? So the markets are reacting. They're very volatile. What happened today just shows that kind of volatility. Whether this woman arrested, the Chinese woman arrested in Canada to be extradited to the U.S. is a consequence of real breaches in the Iranian, so she was arrested. She's the CFO of a large Chinese company, and she is the daughter of the owner of the company, very well connected into the leadership in China, and she was arrested for violations of sanctions on Iran. Now, whether that's real or whether this is a play in the big trade war is yet to be determined, but the markets took it as a very negative sign. It was a sign that this is a play in the trade wars. And generally, the markets right now are taking Donald Trump's word on trade and a pricing downwards as a consequence. But I think the pricing of recession, and we'll have to wait and see, but it looks like the pricing of recession for sometime next year. We'll see if the markets are wrong or whether this is another false alarm. They've priced recessions in the past, and this might be a false alarm. Okay, we got 3 quick super chats. Would you rather live in New York City or California? Oh, hands down California. I mean, primarily because of the weather, but California is a great place to live if you have money. It's a great place to live if you have money. I wouldn't want to be poor in California. But if you're, upper middle class, California is just a pleasant place to live. And taxes in California and New York are almost the same. So it's quality of life, standard of living. I prefer California. Will Bitcoin resurrect in a 2019 recession? No, I'm not suggesting valuation of Bitcoin because I don't know what Bitcoin's value really is. My guess is it's still overpriced. My guess is it's still got a long way to drop. The real value of Bitcoin, I don't think we'll know for a long time. And I don't think the kind of recession we'll see in 2019 is the kind of recession that will see a flood into Bitcoin. Or into gold for that matter. Because I don't think it'll be a earth-shattering, civilizational questioning recession like 2008 was. Now, it might be. If the right things happen in UK with Brexit and France continues downhill and Europe stumbles and China, of course, is heading also towards a recession or towards lower economic growth as a result of trade, but also as a result of just their bad economic policies, you could get a confluence of events that drives the next recession to be a major, real, fundamental recession. I still don't think it's Peter Schiff's recession, because I don't think what's going to happen is the dollar gets wiped out. I think everything gets wiped out in a global recession like that. But even then, I just don't see Bitcoin as a solution. In that kind of recession, gold is a good investment. Any thought on Tim Cook's "It's a Sin" speech? I'm not sure I've heard it yet. So let me check it out. I'm writing it down, and I'll comment on it. Okay, got it down. All right, let's see if there's any other super chat. One more. Was Ayn Rand wrong about Robin Hood, considering that he didn't steal from productive citizens but authoritarian feudal lords? Ayn Rand recognized that fact, but what she pointed out is not what Robin Hood was as an historical figure. She pointed out what Robin Hood had become in popular culture. And steal from the rich and give to the poor was what was associated with Robin Hood. Not steal from the unproductive rich, not steal from the thieving rich and give to the productive poor, but steal from the rich and give to the poor. And in that sense, I think she was right. I think that's the perception, that's the understanding, that's the way Robin Hood was used during the era in which she wrote. Do you think it'll be a recession bad enough for the socialists to come in? Yeah, I mean, I think if there's a recession in 2020, the Democrats are likely to win in the United States. The Democrats have moved dramatically to the left. There are going to be a number of pretty leftist candidates running for president, and you could get a significantly leftist candidate running on the Democrat side and potentially winning. I think Bernie Sanders appeals to a lot of Trump voters, and it's not clear to me who wins, in particularly if you're in a recession or just coming out of a recession. Remember, Bill Clinton beat George Bush because of the recession of 1992, and even though the quarter in which the election was actually held was a quarter of very high economic growth on a GDP basis, the electorate was still in the mindset of a recession and voted at Bill Clinton because they resented George W. Bush. He was also the guy who said, read my lips, no new taxes, and he raised taxes, and then you got a major recession. So there was a double whammy there. But I could easily see, I'm not saying he will lose, he could very well win, but I could easily see Trump losing and to a Democrat, and a significant tilt to the leftwards in the United States, and potentially Corbyn winning in England, and you can see a real tilt to the left throughout. And conservatives will have nobody to blame but themselves. You said that it's a good thing that Jordan Peterson is a busy guy. How come he is, if he's so fundamentally wrong? Why is he so busy? I mean, he's busy because right now truth doesn't sell. Or right now superficial truth sells. So right now, what Jordan Peterson is offering is very comfortable and very convenient for people. He's selling them a mixture of the familiar, a little bit of religion, but not too much, and not too demanding, but a little bit of religion, a little bit of mystical metaphysics, a little bit of primacy of consciousness epistemology, a little bit of the postmodernist, it depends, with some personal responsibility and conservatism thrown in, and recognition that there's a difference between men and female, men and women, and a recognition that pronouns matter, and some common sense type stuff. So Jordan Peterson's appeals because he's interesting, he's metaphysically and epistemologically mainstream left, mainstream right, and he is ethically and politically mainstream center-right. He's not a radical for capitalism. He thinks inequality is a problem. He thinks the government should do something about it. He's a mixed economy. He's not a laissez-faire capitalism guy. And he's not overly challenging morally. He doesn't challenge altruism. He doesn't challenge the idea of Jesus Christ as a superhero, as a moral ideal. And as a consequence, he's popular, and he's smart, and he's interesting, and he's got a charisma. Somebody said yesterday, I yell at you guys. I tell you, this is how it is. I'm a preacher. I preach. I think I preach logically, rationally, but I talk to you. Jordan Peterson talks with us. He talks to us. You feel when Jordan is speaking, you're in a conversation. And that's a strength. And I'm not Jordan. I don't do it. I'm not good at it. But he's got that, wondering, slow, he goes into rants, but they're not the kind of rants where he's interesting. And if you follow him, so why has he been successful? Wow. I mean, that's one of the, if I could mimic his success, I would, but I can't. Partially because I'm too radical. Partially because I'm a different type of thinker. Some would say I'm not as smart as him. I don't know. I'm not going to comment on that, but I'm certainly righter than him in a sense of being right and him being wrong on many issues. Somebody asked, why would Trump voters defect to Sanders or others? Because I think if we're in a recession in 2020, they'll be very unhappy because a recession tends to hit working class people more than anybody else. It'll tend to hit Trump voters. Now, some of them will stick by him no matter what. There's some on the chat right now who will stick by Trump no matter what. But there are those who will say, no, he betrayed us, or no, he didn't do enough, or no, he was too preoccupied with all this other garbage. We need somebody who's really believed in these ideas more consistently for longer. And hey, there's not a huge difference ideologically between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. They're both populist. They're both ultimately of the left. They both hate trade. They both dislike immigrants. There's a lot of similarities between Bernie Sanders' type of leftism and Donald Trump. There are also differences, but there's a lot of similarities. And I don't think it would take much for them to abandon Trump if the economy's not doing well. And I think a lot of others will be tired of Trump. And then the question is the candidate, the Democratic candidate, so offensive that people will vote for Trump even though they hate him? Will the Republicans put up a different candidate? Or will the Democrats find a candidate that will get some people who cannot vote for Trump, who despise Trump, but are not willing to vote for Bernie Sanders, not willing to vote for a complete nutty leftist? Michael asked, isn't objectivism more refreshing than demanding? It's both. It's refreshing and demanding, and it's refreshing in its demands, that it's very demanding. It's demanding that you take true responsibility over your own thinking, over your own life, and it's very demanding of your thinking. It demands that you think. But that's refreshing. Should be refreshing. But it's only refreshing for somebody who's willing to take on those demands. And most people are not. It's only refreshing for those people who are willing to give up their faith in the collective, their faith in their race, their faith in their ethnic group, their faith in God, any God, Deepak Chopra to Jesus Christ. For those who want to hold on to their faith, it's an enemy. It's a threat. It's scary. To those who want to hold on to their collectivism of any thought, of any form, it's a threat. It's scary. It's really demanding. For those who want to hold on to their non-thinking ways, to irrationality, to going by emotion, to not demanding the most of their mind, it's a threat. It's scary. It's demanding. So for us, it's refreshing, but not for everybody. Not for everybody. Somebody's asking what the temperature is in Puerto Rico. Yeah, you should ask that with a few dollars attached to it. I don't know what it's outside now. It's probably 70, 78. Oh, my watch will tell me. 79. I was close. Because it's always pretty much the same temperature. It gravitates between, 75 at night to 85 during the day. Doesn't move much beyond that. And that's about winter. All right, one more story. So I'm not going to talk about the government shutdown, but I do want to give some good news, a little bit of good news, because there's so much hysteria in the world. There's so much bad news in the world. So we hear a lot about the attacks on free speech on campuses. We hear about it all the time. And it seems like when you hear about these attacks on free speech and the deplatforming of speakers and everything, it seems like it's everywhere, all the time, nonstop, that this is the dominant thing going on in American universities. But if you look at the stats don't bear that out. So during 2016, 42 campuses recorded, recorded these kind of episodes of deplatforming, of not letting people speak, of demonstrations, of doing bad stuff. Now, 42 is too many, but it's 42 out of several thousand universities in the United States. It's 42 out of, hundreds of very good universities in the United States. So it's not everywhere, all the time, constantly. Most universities, an overwhelming majority of universities, anybody pretty much can go and speak. And yeah, there might be a demonstration here and there, but there's nothing wrong with demonstrations as long as they don't turn into shout downs or don't turn into violence. And mostly there isn't that. In 2012, the University of Chicago released a statement on principles of free speech expression. And it was the anti, deplatforming. It was the anti-microaggression, the anti, all the nonsense of the crazy left on campuses. It basically said, then we're not going to accept this microaggression here on campuses, and we're not going to give you warnings about microaggressions. And, you're coming here to learn. You're going to hear ideas you don't like. It is what it is. We will not restrict debate or deliberation. I'm quoting. He said, it says, the principle that it may not restrict debate or deliberation because of the ideas put forth are thought to be offensive, unwise, immoral, or wrong-headed. They're just not going to limit speech. And they said, students or anybody else may not obstruct, disrupt, or otherwise interfere with the freedom of others to express views they reject or even loathe. They came out with a statement. And there was some uproar, and there were students who opposed it. And, for example, in Williams College, which is a very, very leftist college, one of these prestigious small schools run by faculty that are overwhelming left, 300 students signed a petition denouncing the statement, denouncing it. Quote, great potential to further silence the voices of people of color, queer people, disabled people, poor people, and others outside the center of power. This is the intersectionality nonsense. Now, yeah, so people objected to it, but it turns out that recently, 100 Williams College faculty members, now there are a lot fewer faculty members than our students, so proportionally, this is a much higher proportion of the faculty than the 300 students were of students, signed a petition to endorse a version of the Chicago Statement. Now that's pretty amazing. That a small, super elite New England college, liberal arts, filled with leftists, would actually support what you'll call free speech absolutism on American campuses. That's great news. Beyond that, 53 colleges, large and small, prestigious and middling, have adopted versions of the Chicago Statement. So 53 universities, more universities than where you saw people shut out. They've actually adopted free speech rules that are for free speech. Even Berkeley committed itself to free speech and defended Ben Shapiro's ability to speak at the university. So not everything is bleak. Because of brave people like the president of the University of Chicago and the faculty members that supported him, because of brave people at organizations like FIRE, which is the institution, it's Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, which is an institution that has monitored free speech and defended free speech on campuses for many, many years, that the Ayn Rand Institute has worked with, because of the Heterodoxy Academy, the Koch brothers Foundation, the Institute for Humane Studies, the Ayn Rand Institute, speakers like Fleming Rose and Christine Hoff Sommers and Heather McDonald and many others, many people like Dave Rubin, the intellectual Doc Webb, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson. Because free speech is being elevated to be the issue that it is, universities, the better people in universities are responding, and the response has been, to a large extent, positive. And the situation of free speech on American campuses is a lot better than what one of it would have expected 2 years ago. And I think the dire predictions of 2 years ago are just unfounded. And so things are pretty good. Things are pretty good. Still a lot of work to do. Still need to do more stuff on free speech. Still plenty of universities that haven't adopted this. But hey, this is okay. Liberal Deutsch asks, anyway, this is good news. And congrats to all those organizations particularly the Ayn Rand Institute, but all those organizations, FIRE, I love FIRE. FIRE is a great organization that have worked diligently and hard and done events. And the Ayn Rand Institute's been doing this since 1989, working on the free speech issue. We did it with the Danish cartoons. We did it recently with free speech panels. We've done it working with Dave Rubin. This is a big issue, one of our major issues. Okay, here's a bunch of questions. Problem is, I need to increase the threshold for these super chat questions because I'm getting a bunch of $2 questions. Well, £2. Oh, Liberal Deutsch is €2. It's a little bit more than $2. That's good. Is it really good that JP is busy spreading evils? I mean, yes and no. Yes, in a sense that he's creating a debate. He's creating a discussion. He's creating interest in metaphysical and epistemological questions. He's opening it up to debate and discussion. And he's indeed opened up to debating us, to discussing with objectivists about epistemology. People are curious about these ideas to some extent because of Jordan Peterson. The ideas he preaches are bad, and they can do damage in the long run. Our job, the job of objectivists, is to challenge those ideas, is to go out there into his world, to his audience, to the people whose minds he's opened up to this discussion and this debate, and propose alternatives. But I think the idea that there's an intellectual debate going on is a good idea. And at the political, personal morality level, the idea that people should take personal responsibility, should stand up straight and make their bed, if you will, is a good opening for us to say, let's go a little deeper. Let's go to the heart of what personal responsibility really means. Let's go to the role of reason in human life and your responsibility to think. All right. Could you interview Dave Hammond about physics? No. Dave and I are not speaking, let's put it that way. What were Ayn Rand's thoughts on quantum mechanics? Ayn Rand wouldn't have thoughts on quantum mechanics. Ayn Rand was a philosopher, a novelist. She was not a physicist. Why would a philosopher, not a philosopher of science, have thoughts on quantum mechanics? I think she had thoughts, potentially, as a philosopher would have thoughts on the interpretation of the quantum phenomena. You know, the idea that there's no causality, that the idea that it's random, that it's all probabilistic, she rejected, or I don't know if she rejected, but philosophers in objectivism rejected. Nobody's rejecting quantum mechanics. Nobody's rejecting the physics. They're rejecting the interpretation, and indeed there are multiple interpretations of quantum mechanics, multiple explanations of the experiments and the equations. And those, I don't think the physics profession has yet resolved which explanation is the right, true explanation. All right, this is going to be the last one, and Liberal Deutsch has put up €10 for this one, but I'm tired. An hour and a half is enough. You agreed in one of your shows that it is fair enough for individual Poles to try to maintain a certain Polishness. I did. Is there such a thing already, the average guy's concept of culture? Yeah, but the average guy's, concept of culture is food, the music, stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, most people try to maintain that. Great. I mean, it's fair enough. I'm not excited about that. Polish food sucks. So trying to maintain Polish food and not embracing good food from France, Italy, Spain, Asia, hurts the Polish people because they don't get to experience really good food. So, and the same with music. Ayn Rand had a pretty awful things to say about, folk music. But Poles have some great musicians that they can be really proud of and really embrace their music. But at the end of the day, as long as they don't reject Beethoven because he was German or Rachmaninoff because he was Russian, then fine. But you know, there's a certain history, and there's a certain language, and there's certain foods, and there's certain habits that are associated with being Polish. I get it. I'm not just picking on Poles, but this is true of any culture. And yeah, common people will maintain that or try to maintain it, but there's nothing good or that's not something to strive towards. The ideal is to strive towards the best in everything in life. I want the best damn food I can eat. I don't care what ethnic group it comes from. I want the best damn music I can listen to. I don't care what the ethnic group the composer was. I want to use the most effective language I can. By the way, that's English for all you Europeans who don't want to study English. Everybody should know English. I want to read the best novels, go to the best theater. I know I'm a globalist. I'm a globalist. I want the best, no matter where on the globe it comes from. And I think that's what a culture of individualism is. That's what American culture has always been. That's what the melting pot means. I don't want authentic Mexican. I want super duper California modern Mexican fancy cuisine. And when I go to Mexico City, I'm going to go to, you know, the restaurant in Mexico City that's rated one of the top 50 restaurants in the world because it's not authentic. To hell with authentic. I love the food in Puerto Rico. Not the authentic food in Puerto Rico, the food that the really good chefs in Puerto Rico have turned authentic food into. I want the best. I don't care if it's American, I don't care if it's Mexican, I don't care if it's Chinese. And this was what America was. This is what America is. I'm a cultural expropriator. Absolutely. I'm not an expropriator because I pay for it. Merit. It's all about merit. It's all about quality. I love going to museums in Europe. I don't go to museums in Asia because I think Asian art generally sucks. Objectively. But the food, oh my God, is fantastic. And the entrepreneurs in China are amazing. There's so much. Why is Stefan dying? Why is Stefan dying? Stefan, relax. I don't know. What am I supposed to say? I mean, to me, this is so self-evident. This is what America's about. America's about the best. The best. It's about a melting pot. And wanting American food, whatever the hell that is, because it's American, is immoral. It's wrong. So yes, there's a sense in which Poles, ordinary Poles, will maintain Polish culture. But real culture, value-oriented culture, is about wanting the best. Whether you're in Poland, whether you're in Ukraine, whether you're in Vietnam, whether you're in America, whether you're in Argentina, whether you're anywhere. It's not about settling for whatever accidentally your culture, your geographic area happened to put together. Yes, Abtin mentions that the restaurant I'm going to go to in Mexico City is called Pujol, although now Mexico City has a number of world-class restaurants, so there's probably 2 or 3 potential Mexican restaurants I'm going to go to when I visit Mexico in February. I love really, really good food. So anyway, I'm done. I have to go rest. I'm tired. What is this? No, I'm sitting at home, and I don't flirt with cute waitresses. I flirt with my wife. That's it. I only flirt with my wife. No cute waitresses for me. All right. I am going to sit with my wife and go see the Vikings. I don't know. Go see some television. Maybe watch the basketball game. I think the basketball game might be over already, but I think the Celtics are playing. And then I'm going to go to sleep because in Puerto Rico it's already 9:30 at night, so it's late. So another couple of hours and I'm done. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll be back tomorrow with the Yaron and Amy show. I have no idea what we're going to be talking about because Amy gets to decide those fun things. And she will probably let me know, 10 minutes before the show starts? No, that's not fair to Amy. A few hours before the show starts, she'll let me know what we're going to be talking about. But I'm looking forward to that. And then on Wednesday night, we've got Jonathan Honing. And we're going to be talking about what Americanism really is. And we're going to be talking about his new book, edited. The book he edited, which I have an essay in, which a lot of objectivists have essays in, which is Ayn Rand's this book. I'm struggling here. It's this book. There it is. New Textbook of Americanism. That's the book we're going to be talking about on Wednesday. So go buy it. Go get a copy before the show. And you can ask Jonathan questions. You can ask Jonathan questions on Super Chat. Maybe Jonathan will even agree. Maybe he will even agree to talk about the markets, about the stock market. That'll be fun. He always avoids talking to me about finance, but maybe we can get him on air to talk about the stock market. All right, because he's got the series that he does this on YouTube or somewhere on objective investing. So maybe we can use that opportunity to to promote his show. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great evening. Have a great rest of your week. Let's hope markets are not quite as volatile tomorrow, or at least go up, or at least the stocks I own go up and the stocks I'm short go down finally, so I can make a little bit of money.